all of this stuff about student-centered education, if you start thinking about what is the job of a scientist, student-centered education will not do any favors to having good scientific research done when these students graduate and they've never been challenged. You may recall last week that I talked about the unfortunate case of Professor Maitland Jones, and there's a couple of updates to say on that. Like the Academic Freedom Association, excuse me, put out a very poignant statement on it, and remarking at how bad a thing that was, and it is quite bad. But I saw another piece that came out. It was published, I think, in higher ed something. But it was republished by the Heterodox Academy on their blog. And I thought it would be interesting because they make a point. Now, again, why do I talk about some of the higher education side of things? Let's face it, the university is where we train the next generation of scientists and STEM professionals currently. I would like to see something a bit better, to be honest myself. I don't know exactly what form that would take. I've been thinking on that a bit. But I'm not so sure the university is the best place to do the training of scientists anymore. That's a whole other conversation to have. But the one I wanted to bring up was they wrote this piece, and the reason I bring it up is because they're, of course, responding from, Times Higher Education, there we go. They're responding to the events in the chemistry department and the firing of Professor Jones, and made some very good points. And I actually want to connect it to, what goes on. What goes on if you go into being a research scientist, or what goes on if you are, a chemist at a big company, or basically if you're any scientist practicing your discipline, the kinds of things that go on. And think about that with respect to student-centered education, and why student-centered education is thusly a bad idea, because what it is in the scientific world is nowhere near what student-centered education would have our students believe it to be. So, problem with student-centered education, Rebecca Wanick, I have no idea if I pronounced that name right, and Nina Powell. This essay is a special repost from Times Higher Education responding to recent events in the chemistry department at NYU, New York University. Responses further exploring the advantages and disadvantages of student-centered learning are welcome. Now, as you might guess, they have a lot of problems with it. I have a lot of problems with it too. Student-centered learning is intended to promote a more inclusive environment and to democratize the classroom. It is a broad philosophy, but its fundamental principle is the belief that education should involve a partnership between the student and educator. Further, it advocates that education should be personalized to meet students where they are, with curricula design and course structure based on their individualized learning experiences. Such an approach is increasingly hailed as the gold standard in higher education and is ostensibly well-meaning. We can assume that. Never attribute to malice what can be explained by incompetence, but I forget what that is. I think there's Occam's razor, but I forget. But either way, I'm not inclined to do that unless there's no other option there. So yeah, I do think that sometimes it's well-meaning for most people, but then there are others that also have malicious intents. That's a whole other conversation. It embodies the idea that education, as a route to social mobility and desirable careers, should be accessible to as many as possible. Education, yes. Schooling, I mean, K through 12 schooling is not necessarily good. Education in universities is somewhat different, though it is still the same thing where you're going from class to class, but the classes are all different. It's not like you always know you're going to be in math one day. Sometimes you're probably not going to be. If it's like 3 or 4 or 5 classes scattered throughout the week, your schedule gets to change very, very much. But that's a whole other thing. We have no argument with that view. Yeah, I don't have a problem with the notion that quality education should be available to as many people as possible. But in the vein of what I said when I was talking about the case with Professor Jones, when you get to college, if you are the student, are the primary person responsible for your education. Not the professor. Not the professor, not the administrators. You are the primary person responsible for your education. Does that mean the teacher can teach you crap and you're still supposed to learn it? No, of course not. If the teacher is teaching horribly, the instructor is teaching horribly, excuse me, then sometimes that can just be a problem all on its own. But if you're not even trying to learn as a student, you've no one to blame. You go look in the mirror, you know. But it is also incumbent upon the universities and the professors to challenge said students and push them to greater things. And the authors here make a point that I do want to get to. And there may indeed be some value in student-centered learning if the practical constraints of delivering a personalized education, such as class sizes, are considered, particularly if students' ambitions align with the educational goals that deliver the best opportunity for their long-term growth, development, thinking, and citizenship. But these conditions are not often met in today's marketized mass higher education, and that is what it is. Many will contend that technology and online learning offer a solution to the personalization issue, giving students the ability to self-pace using asynchronous content or dynamic tests that adjust to prior mistakes. However, such hopes are often belied by the messy reality of how students actually engage with such content. Point to make on this: YouTube videos, for example. Podcasts, for example. You could be off doing something else, and if you're not necessarily paying attention to what the person is saying, you're not absorbing the material, and you're not learning anything. And it's very, very easy to just let a YouTube video run and, have the view. Say you've logged in to view the video of a professor when they've put it up on the private platform for that the university uses per se. It may not be a public YouTube video, for example. Yeah, you can just put that on in the background, and all else. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to learn from it. As for the issue of education goals, universities have in essence given up trying to tell students what is good for them. Fueled by the shift towards student-centered learning, student satisfaction is widely accepted as the primary indicator of educational success. But this does undergraduates a disservice because student satisfaction bears no necessary relationship to true educational objectives. Exactly. The educational objective is mastery of the material. Standards set by the discipline in particular, what do they need to learn? And I think a cat is jumping around in the closet, so pardon me. Pardon me if there's a sudden crash. The professions themselves are the ones who set the standards for what is basic level mastery. When you get to the university level, anyway, that is often what happens with those particular things. It is coming from the necessities of the profession. This is what you need to know to succeed in this field, to have a career in this field if you really want to go into it. Because with college, it is not necessarily you're just getting fundamentals of life kind of education, which is your K through 12 or what it's supposed to be. Now you're getting fundamentals of, if I really want to go into this career, these are the things I need to know. And these are specifically, when I think of it, for things that are STEM jobs, for medicine, for all those kinds of things that are of critical importance. You need the basic fundamentals of that career path in your undergraduate education if you want to go that way. Or in some cases, it may be an entire thing, because there are some things where you can just go at it with a bachelor's degree and be totally fine. But, yeah, being happy about it, being satisfied, doesn't necessarily match on. You can do great in a class and still hate the material. You can do great in the class and still hate the experience. You can do terrible in the class and yet you love the professor and you love the experience and you loved interacting with the students. Both of those things can be true, and you can also pair it the other way. You can do great in the class, love the experience, and you can do terrible in the class and hate the experience. You can have a whole myriad of things in between. There is no correlation that I know of between student satisfaction and mastery of material. Take assessment, for example. Students find exams stressful. I did. I will cop to this. I was a graduate student not too long ago. And I will cop to that. The exams are stressful. They can be very stressful. So we are told to reduce the number of exams. Neither do students like to read, so we are told to assign easier and shorter readings. Students find it hard to concentrate, so we are told to break down lectures into small chunks and intersperse activities in between. Students enjoy media content and are happy to engage with YouTube and social media, so we are told to incorporate more videos and make course material and assessments more creative and interactive. Some students don't like to speak in class, so we are told to make sure there are a myriad of ways students can participate without having to actually speak. Such well meaning educational initiatives, alongside grade inflations, flexible deadlines, warm language, and feedback, deny students access to the type of educational experience that universities were designed for. They shortchange students by appealing to their immediate wants and feelings rather than their potential for greatness, their capacity for reason, and their fundamental need to leave the university better than when they arrived. I don't know that that's a fundamental need, but yeah, on the whole, that is the single biggest problem. I couldn't have said it more eloquently with the idea of a student-centered education. And unfortunately, that's the way K through 12 education has drifted, is being about student-centered education, where you can't hurt the feelings of anybody involved, and it's all about feelings and emotion and what have you, and empathy and all this other kind of stuff, rather than learning mastery of the material and helping the kids understand resilience, that yeah, you're going to fail in life. In fact, failure is probably going to be the normal thing. Failure is probably going to be the normal thing for a very long time. It's very few people who just succeed outright at anything. It takes many, 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 many failures at things before you succeed. The student-centered mindset has led to a dumbing down of curricula and a constant pressure on educators to motivate students rather than a pressure on students to take ownership of their own success and failure. Let me read that again. The student-centered mindset has led to a dumbing down of curricula and a constant pressure on educators to motivate students rather than a pressure on students to take ownership of their own success and failure. Exactly. You, when you are in college, this is preparing you for your career potentially. Your education is primarily your responsibility. You will succeed or fail based upon what you do in college. If we're doing this right. If you go down the student-centered route, you may succeed in college, but then you'll probably fail in life. I'm sorry, because that's the thing, is if you just make it so soft that everybody succeeds, well, go out into the real world, but it's not going to be as kind. And I guarantee you it won't be as kind as a scientist, because, let me see here. Easier and shorter readings. Okay, here's the thing. If you're doing stuff in research, what are you doing all the time? You are doing lots of reading of long articles, very few multimedia summaries, very few video summaries of things, what have you. Long articles, things like what I've reviewed on this channel, you read them. And you read lots and lots of them, and you learn to read them quickly and try to retain material, or you try to learn to read them quickly. I struggle with that myself. And get back to them, and sometimes you go back to it 2 or 3 times. You're like, okay, thinking about it. What did they say? Do that again. Check this out. Oh, that kind of thing. That's what they meant. If you can't do that, students don't like to read. So, doesn't mean you're assigning easier and shorter readings. The better thing to do would be cultivating a love of reading. Actually, and that's a failure in the K through 12 education side of things in particular, in the way they've done that. I send you over to The Reason We Learn for that. Deb Philman has talked about that at length. But that's where I find this fascinating. In that things like that, if students don't like to read, but you have to read so much. You have to be able to sit for a really long period and write. Stress? Yeah. Dealing with research is very stressful, particularly if you are funded on soft money. And here's what I mean by that. Soft money means you're grant funded. What does that mean? I'm the one who pays my own salary, in effect, because if you are funded off of some soft money as a research scientist, meaning you're grant funded, you are the one writing grant proposals, competing for research dollars with everybody. That is insanely stressful. Why? Because it pays your salary, it pays student salaries, it pays potentially other staff salaries in your office. And if you can't get that proposal that you need when you need it, then you got to tell somebody that they're fired. That is intensely stressful. And if you can't figure out how to handle the stress of an exam and go on from that, then that's not the kind of thing you want to go into with this part of stuff with scientists that people forget, is that you do have to do there's intensely stressful things with deadlines going on there. There's also, dissertation defenses and thesis defenses. Those are very stressful. Nth degree is more stressful than an exam will be. You can't figure out how to move past that, you're not necessarily ready for a career in science. The result is that student-centered education leaves undergraduates in a state of constant busyness, but also constant worry about the value of these low-stakes endeavors. Students complete more and more simple and straightforward tasks, worksheets, projects, quizzes, and so on, without the opportunity to think about what they're doing or learning. It is no wonder they lack motivation. They are denied the life-affirming pride that derives from achieving something genuinely meaningful and built on hard work. And without critical feedback on the work they undertake, students are not given the necessary guidance they need to improve. In this sense, meeting students where they are keeps them where they are. Exactly. Let's see. Transformative educational experience is supposed to be the point of the university education. Students deserve opportunities for challenge so they develop the necessary strengths of mind and character to meet the myriad challenges they will inevitably face in the higher stakes context of post-university life. Such strengths will also equip them to potentially rise above personal and social circumstances and pursue the life they want. This is the other thing, is if you're just making it so easy, then don't you cultivate a sense of entitlement that, oh yeah, no, this kind of thing will always be, somebody else will always take care of it for me. I just have to show up and I'll get the grade. No, you won't. If you just show up as a scientist and you're not doing research and what have you, you don't have a job very long. You really don't. You got to be willing to work really, really hard at times as a scientist. If we decide that making courses less intellectually and emotionally demanding equates with making education accessible, that is an unkind assumption. We are in effect saying that students attending university lack the necessary ability to withstand an education that is intellectually and emotionally demanding. Students deserve to be taken seriously and be seen as capable, both in terms of their capacity to improve and their capability to find resolve against momentary unhappiness. Exactly. And the other thing with this is that, capacity to improve and find resolve against unhappiness. I said it before, and Thomas Sowell talks about this in the first couple of chapters of Discrimination and Disparities. Everybody seems to think that if you remove all the barriers and this, like that, what have you, and all this other kind of stuff, that success will come to everybody. That's not true. Success is not the norm for everybody. Failure is the norm. Failure is the norm, and that can suck. Don't get me wrong. It sucks sometimes to just fail. But that's the norm. And I'll give things like that. Go back to the grant proposals thing. Go back to the grant proposals thing. When you're new in the field of science, you don't necessarily know what you're doing. You don't necessarily know how to structure a paper. And often you're working with a senior scientist your first couple of years out of your PhD to, learn some of those things on the job that you didn't learn while you were in grad school. Still, you're going to fail several times when you go after your first couple of grant proposals. You're going to fail. And Lord only knows that's happened. That's happened to me. That's happened to others that I know, that you just absolutely fail the first couple of times, at least. First few times. That sucks to fail. Don't get me wrong. The other thing, you have momentary unhappiness. You write a paper, you get some really bad peer reviews. Some peer reviewers can be really, really nasty. To be perfectly honest, some peer reviewers can be really, really, really nasty with you. What are you going to do if you get one of those? And, it's not intellectually, because you didn't get the push. You didn't get pushed to challenge yourself, to do amazing things and what have you in your academic career. What are you going to do when you run into those kinds of moments? You have to find resolve against momentary unhappiness. Is the way they phrase it here is interesting. I prefer the word resilience. Because you're going to get some shitty things that happen. As a scientist, you really are, whether it be from grant proposals or what have you. Student-centered education, in this thing that they're talking about here, the problem with it is that, you are basically saying a student is not capable of doing this. Now, by the same token, not all students are meant to be scientists. Not all. You may think that's a dream career, but you find as you go through the coursework that you don't have the talent. That doesn't mean you're not talented in something else. That you can't find a career in something else. That's not what I'm saying. Just because you don't end up in the career you dream of going into doesn't mean anything negative about you. It just means that that's not something you're as it doesn't mean anything negative. Let's put it that way. It just means there's a different career out there that is something that'll be awesome for you. Put it that way. For the students watching us. Let's see. The guise of student-centered education is also at its core dishonest. It tells students that they are uniquely skilled and uniquely talented, often touted as empowering their individuality. However, unless you're paying for a private tutor, education takes place in groups alongside several, if not several hundred others. Moreover, in an era of mass higher education, staff-to-student ratios are falling rather than rising. There is no way that an individual educator can tailor lessons or assessments to each individual student's needs and their preferences, nor should they. Endorsing that perspective that each student should be treated as unique and offered personalized accommodations would fail to push them to develop a healthier mindset that connects self with surroundings. Specifically, if a part of the university education is about preparing students for post-university life, they must begin to recognize that their uniqueness is situated in a shared environment that requires adjusting the self to the situation and not the other way around. Exactly. You're going to find yourself in some lousy situations. You're going to find yourself in some great situations. It doesn't make you great. You're not a brilliant person just by nature of being an individual. You're a unique individual, yes. And they're not saying get rid of individualism here. They're not saying that. They are saying in the idea here that, okay, you're not special just because you're a unique individual. Okay? It doesn't make you special. It doesn't mean you're going to succeed at everything you do. Nor should you. Nor should a professor spend their time tailoring absolutely everything. Now, this is different. They're talking about the class thing here. Go to office hours, go to tutoring, go to all those other things, and professors will often sit with you, and if they get to know you well enough, you work out, oh, okay, the student doesn't understand this. I will help them figure it out this way. I will help them with that. I will send them over here to this other person who knows a better way to teach it than I do. Those other kinds of things do happen. Let's see. We should not disempower students by telling them to expect problems they face to be resolved by the people around them, recognizing and catering to their needs. Doing so takes away individual agency and results in a sense of entitlement, generally not viewed positively by employers, partners, family, friends, or colleagues. We should empower students by motivating self-efficacy and self-regulation, rather than fostering an approach to social life where expectation leads to passivity and victimhood. Bravo. Because that, in my judgment, is probably what happened, unfortunately, to Professor Jones, is the idea that these students expected, they were disempowered because, it had to be catered to them, it had to be catered to their feelings, to their satisfaction. They didn't try, and then when they ran into the situation where that professor was not going to give them the grade that they wanted for just showing up, that's when they flipped out and signed the petition, what have you. They go on here. I don't want to read this because I don't want to read all of this because this is a long article, but the one thing I want to make about this point with the disempowering, if you are teaching students through the student-centered education approach, that, everything else will be resolved by somebody else. Science then doesn't happen. And there's a reason for that, in that there's an awful lot of problem solving that goes on when you're doing scientific research. That problem solving has to be done by the person doing the research. And so if you have students who are going into being researchers who are waiting for someone else to solve the problem, science doesn't happen. No problems get solved. No questions get answered. They're just around there waiting. It's a pet peeve of mine, but it's a problem I have, is that where you end up with people who just scream problem, 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 and don't have any thoughts on how to fix it. That's what you're teaching with students in a student-centered education approach. As you're just teaching, there's a problem, there's a problem, there's a problem. You're not teaching them about, you're not encouraging them to solve said problem, to learn from mistakes, to develop the ability that you know they quite probably have with reason, developing their ability for reason and rationality and what have you, can probably solve that problem. But you're not encouraging it if you go with a student-centered education where it's all about their satisfaction and how they feel. It cannot be about feelings. It does have to be about pushing students to be great, because when you get to that in a science perspective, science stops if you go that way. Now, okay. Yeah, some points to make in this. This is a great piece. I do suggest you go read it. If the expert, yeah, and the other thing that student-centered education tends to do, they talk about here, is that it sets student and instructor on an equal playing field. So that's not accurate, because the instructor has a nth degree more experience than the student that's just walked into their class. You can't expect that. You need to actually foster a respect for established knowledge and expertise and understanding. Now, granted, yes, you don't want to discourage students from challenging their professors at times. You don't want to discourage that. They still should. And that's part of the actual, in the Enlightenment sense, critical thinking, and what have you, that they start learning along with reading and reading comprehension if you do that right. But you can't have science if it's going to be student-centered education where it's all about somebody's feelings, because it's a pretty brutal thing to be going after the truth sometimes. It is important to recognize that part of the shift towards student-centered education is not driven by a desire to promote inclusivity per se, but to disguise the desire simply to get students through university. Graduation, not education, is the desired consumer outcome at the myriad pay for a degree institutions that compete for many students whose pursuit of a university education is motivated solely by a perception that it is necessary even to land entry-level jobs, let alone promotions. That perception, promoted by employers and universities alike, leads students to see higher education as a chore, a stumbling block, or a checkbox on the way to something else. They're unwilling to put in the necessary work and want the easiest path to recognition. When students' behaviors and goals are in conflict with what is necessary for the learning that underlies a transformative education, I don't necessarily like the word transformative here, I just would say education flatly, it is especially important to turn to the educators rather than the students for direction. Yes, the educators, and I don't think as from the teaching schools, let's put it that way. For scientists, it needs to be the scientists of their specific disciplines themselves that set the standards for what constitutes mastery of the basics of the discipline, what constitutes mastery of the discipline such that you earn a master's degree, and same thing for a PhD. Even when students have the right goals for their education, it is short-sighted at best to expect them to know how to design and structure curricula, syllabuses, and assessments. At worst, it is cruel. In addition to their deep knowledge of their disciplines, most university educators also have years of experience developing pedagogical techniques that effectively educate. It is incongruous to expect that students would have more or more accurate knowledge of how their educational experience should be structured. When we adopt a student-centered education philosophy, irrespective of how well-meaning we may be, we shortchange students. Rather than succeeding in empowering them, we fail to equip them with the skills to deal with the challenges they will invariably confront as their life after university unfolds. When we see these consequences and choose to do nothing, we perpetuate this unkindness. Instead, let us respect students' potential to access the transformation that a rigorous university experience can offer. Only then can we claim to operate in a student-centered fashion, by providing students with the education they deserve. Yes, as in fact-centered, as in centered on what it means to master a discipline, as set by the professionals and the current masters of that discipline, if you will. So, all of this stuff about student-centered education, if you start thinking about what is the job of a scientist, student-centered education will not do any favors to having good scientific research done when these students graduate and they've never been challenged, never been shown to see how, never been challenged, never shown how great they actually are at their particular discipline, but they just don't want to work and they want somebody else to solve those research questions for them. They won't last long as scientists. Let me know what you think. It's a bit of a harsh note to end on, but let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. Stay curious.